The music at the community hall was too loud for the room, the bass rolling under the lacquered chairs like a low tide. Glasses trembling against white linen, jasmine garlands damp with chilled air. I stood at the edge of the stage lights, trying not to blind myself with the sheen of them. My phone warm in my palm, my cousin Samia framed in gold and blush at the far end of the dais as the videographer circled. I had 17 minutes to make a reversal request stick, 12 to get the bank to acknowledge custody of the funds, and maybe 6 before someone in my family, hair sprayed into place and heavy with pride, asked why I looked like I'd bitten tinfoil. The smell of cardamom and spirit gum hung together in the cooled air from overworked Assis, and I scanned down the push notification again. The number too big to be a mistake. My college fund emptied in 3 transfers. Labeled family expenses, the beneficiary listed as a private account in my father's name. On the stage, the groom's friends started clapping to pull people to the dance floor, the sharp clap of palms hitting and breaking like whetstones. And I flicked open the banking app and then the spreadsheet I kept in a hidden folder labeled Utilities. The hall lights were cold, the chairs warm, my wrists clammy against the satin inside of my clutch. I had rehearsed for 100 disasters, but not this one. Still, the procedure I'd built for emergencies had the same skeleton timestamp. Freeze, notify, escalate, document, countersign, verify. The account showed 3 outgoing wires, the memo field typed like a shrug. I went to messages and typed to my friend Heina, a junior associate at a firm that had a knack for quick injunctions. Need to file a stop payment affidavit and notify the bank's fraud risk team. Documentation ready. Can you call me? A waiter passed with a tray of floral mocktails that threw rosewater into the air and my throat went dry. I pocketed my phone, then pulled it out again because habit is the second brain. And I brought up the backup copy of my trust documents. The education fund agreement my mother had signed when my scholarship came in, custodial until age 18, and then cosign authority to me, not to be transferred without mutual consent or educational need. The groom's aunt was telling a joke at the mic. My father was not laughing. He was moving discreetly toward the foyer, where the light went from ice to amber and the sound of the band dropped to a muffled shrug. I followed, my heels catching on a seam in the carpet like an admonishment. And at the end of the corridor, I saw my mother standing near the mirror wall, straightening a brooch, the floor's glossy tiles reflecting the pearl embroidery of her shawl like frost. She looked younger when she didn't notice she was being watched, the way a person looks crossing a bridge and counting the planks. My father's hand rested on the table where the guest book lay open. I raised my phone. 3 wires, I said quietly. For my education fund? The pause between the words and their echo in the glass was thinner than I expected. My father didn't turn. My mother's brooch clicked once. It's a family event, he said finally, as if that were a clause in a contract that excused breach. The mirror gave me back a face I almost didn't recognize, too calm to belong to someone my age. Behind us, the hall surged at the chorus, the percussion spilling like hail across the dance floor. I swallowed. The account requires my consent. He looked at me then, a quick slice of surprise followed by pity, the kind of pity that comes packaged as lesson. College funds are for family advancement, and this is advancement, he said. Don't be dramatic. It was then, not with the push notification, that heat traveled up my neck like a hand. The guest book pen had a glass feather that threw light on the tablecloth. I set my clutch down, took out the printed copy of the custodial trust short. Neat. Notarized last year, and placed it under the pen. The bank recognizes this document. I said more to the feather than to them, and so will the court if I ask it to. My mother's mouth softened and then sharpened again, a watch gear catching. You're not 18 for another month, she said softly. What exactly are you planning to do in the next hour? A door sighed somewhere behind us. The hallway cooled by a degree, the AC kicking a little harder. I'm going to reverse the transfer, I said. And I heard the simple arrogance of it, the way I'd barrel past a gate with a student pass. There's a recall window. The bank's control center has a midnight batch. If I get a freeze and an acknowledgement before the batch hits, the reversal can execute overnight. My father's eyebrows rose, whether in disbelief or contempt, I couldn't tell. "You know what?" he said, as if announcing a harmless sentence. "We'll talk tomorrow. Enjoy the wedding." And he turned to go. The floor's reflection shimmered like dull water. My palms prickled. I felt the lines I'd prepared for other battles reach for this one. Settle, fit. I spoke without raising my voice. "Seems I'm not family." He stopped. My mother's head dipped as if the brooch had gained weight. The glass feather pen threw another sliver of light. I picked it up and signed my name on the guest book as if that page were a pledge, then pocketed my printed trust again. My stomach flicked at the smell of rose and heat. It wasn't rage that moved me down the hallway back toward the music. It was process. I texted Hina, "Need a short affidavit, transfer without consent from Custodial Education Trust. Request temporary restraining order and bank freeze. You have the agreement PDF. I'll sign digitally. 3 dots. Then on it. Sharewire IDs. I copied the strings. 15-digit references. Time codes. Beneficiary account ending 2247. A minute later, my phone vibrated. Hina's call, the line crisp over the hall's fuzzy roar. "We can file an emotion for an emergency freeze with the duty judge," she said, voice concise, caffeine straight. "But the bank can hold on risk grounds long enough to let the court catch up. Call their apps agent, escalate to operations, then risk. Get a recorded acknowledgement with a case number." The photographer's flash popped like a low-voltage storm. "I'll get the case number," I said. "Draft the affidavit with the trust language. I'll attach the bank logs and screenshots. We'll need the bank's reversal email as an exhibit." "Sent you a template," she said. "I'll prep an email to the bank manager and CC compliance." In the hall, the scent of Birani slid toward us, saffron pulling at memory and hunger and nerves. I went to the side corridor by the kitchens where it was cooler and smelled like cloves. The wall there was a patchwork of reinforced glass and shadow. I called the bank's 24/7 line. The IVR bland and polished until I hit the option for fraud, unauthorized transfers, and keyed in my card's last digits. "Agent Patel speaking," a clear voice said. "How can I help you tonight?" I named the account, the trust terms, the 3 transfers, the beneficiary. I didn't consent. I said, "The funds are for educational expenses only. I need an immediate freeze and reversal request." And I waited for the hesitation that would let me gauge how much I had to escalate. It didn't come. "I'm opening a case," Patel said, tone bending toward formal. "Let me read back the details." While she typed, I opened photos and added the PDF of the trust to a folder called Reversal Wedding. Because labels matter even at ridiculous moments. Patel came back. "Case ID 90614AR, she said. "I've escalated to risk and apps. I need your consent to place a temporary block and initiate a recall. We'll email you the reversal form. You must sign and send within an hour to meet our cutoff." I exhaled a measure of breath I hadn't been holding. "Please read back the beneficiary account name," I said. She did, and my chest tightened. It wasn't only in my father's name. My mother's middle initial was floating there like a warning light. "I'm also emailing your branch manager to flag the risk hold," Patel said. "This will freeze the outgoing transfers as pending to the extent they're in our control. If the receiving bank has credited, we'll issue a recall." "I need a recorded acknowledgement," I said, "and a reference to the operating policy you're relying on." There was a brief pause, appreciative or surprised. I've learned those pauses can propel conversations. "Recorded acknowledgement attached to the case," she said. "Operating policy SOP IBFT-12. Recall within batch, risk hold with customer affidavit. Please note, if the beneficiary disputes, we require a court order." "We're filing," I said. "I'll send the affidavit and logs to the risk mailbox. Can you add a freeze code that prevents branch override?" "Yes," she said. "Adding freeze code F97, branch override requires risk and compliance approval." Her keyboard clicked like rain. I hung up and immediately forwarded the case ID to Hina with the policy reference, then opened my laptop, thin, anonymous, always in my tote. Even at weddings, because some habits aren't neuroses. Their armor. The kitchen corridor's light flickered with the swing of doors. A warm breath of cumin and steam pulsing each time they opened. I tethered my phone and pulled up my email. The bank's reversal form arrived with that corporate calm that feels like it has been vacuum sealed. I filled it with the candor precision requires. Times, amounts, account numbers. The phrase without consent per custodial trust terms. And then I attached screenshots of the app's transaction log and my cosign authority letters. And I signed it with my digital certificate. The cursor gliding as if it had trained for this. I hit send to the risk mailbox and CC'd the manager Patel, CCD, a Mr. Niem who, in his profile, picture on the branch page, wore a tie that convinced me he checked his main inbox at midnight. I flagged the email high importance, even though I hate drama. Sometimes you perform urgency to wake slowness. A low rumble of dolls rolled into the hall like weather. The brass warmed the air by degrees. My phone buzzed with Hina's document. The affidavit draft, 3 pages, clean, scaled. With the trust clauses and the request for a temporary restraining order and injunction against dissipation of funds. I read it, mouth dry. I made 2 edits, removing a line that sounded like accusation, inserting a line that sounded like compliance and signed. Then, remembering what pressure feels like on paper, I added my student ID, a scanned image to show that this wasn't theater. This was a person with an exam schedule and a spreadsheet. Hina pinged. Filing emotion now. I'll send this stamped acknowledgement when the duty judge's clerk records it. Then, also CCing branch manager with your affidavit. I listened to the AC's low hum, to the clink of cutlery in the half-light by the kitchens, to the swish of saris and suits at the other end. My cousin's laughter reached down the corridor, warm and relieved, a sound I'd always liked. A server brushed past, the starch in his sleeve, scraping softly like a whispered warning. I checked the case portal Patel had sent, saw the status change, escalated Drisk review. Then freeze code F97, applied. I exhaled when I saw the phrase intrabank recall scheduled. 23:30. There was a good chance one of the wires had landed at the receiving bank already. The others might still be in the batch queue. I knew enough to know Hope likes to pretend it's strategy. I texted Samia, 10 minutes. I'll be back for your speech. She sent a heart and a string of question marks. I typed bank drama, and she wrote, take their heads and then dance with me. I smiled. The corridor flickered dimly with an exit sign at the far end. I stepped into the cooler foyer because movement steadies me. My mother stood there looking into the darkness where the parking lot lights made rivers of chrome on black. You think this makes you independent? She said without looking at me, her voice faint and flat like a flute under a marching band. Everything makes me more independent, I said. But this makes me compliant with the law. The word law has a smell, I've learned. It smells like printer toner and winter air. She finally turned. We raised you, she said. We put money aside for you. The wedding is for family. It's not a crime to use your own money for your own people. The hall's cold light cut our faces into neat halves. It is if the terms say otherwise, I said. And if the bank believes I consented, I need to show that I didn't. And if the court believes this is a family dispute, I need to show that it's a custodial breach. I pulled out my phone and opened the trust again, showing the clause I'd highlighted earlier. Funds designated exclusively for educational expenses. Transfer requires beneficiary cosign. Custodial misuse subject to injunctive relief. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at my hands, the steadiness of them, as if that steadiness were treachery. She said, this is about humiliation. You want to embarrass us? I could feel the scented humidity of the hall pushing against the glass, fog-making triangles in the corners. No, I said softly, I want school paid for. And I want to see if the generosity you taught me extends to obeying our own signatures. From the ballroom, a cousin called my name. A garland swung. Laughter rose like birds shaken from a tree. My mother's jaw worked in silence. Then she said, your father will fix it. A phrase that sounded like a script she'd rehearsed for rooms where scripts are currency. I nodded once, because I believe in naming roles. He can fix it by consenting to the reversal, I said. Or the bank will fix it by freezing the wires. Or the court will fix it by enjoining dissipation. Either way, it gets fixed. The branch manager's email arrived with the delicate prompt of a rumor. Received, he wrote. Freeze applied as per SOPIBFT 12. Awaiting reversal form received and affidavit received. Initiating recall. Will confirm. Please be available for verification call. I replied with my number even though he had it and wrote a one-line thank you because courtesy oils gears. Then a second email stacked on the first, as discussed with App's agent Patel. We confirm freeze code F97 and recall ticket RT5531 if the receiving bank credits back. The funds will return to your trust account tonight. If not, we will hold pending court order. I recognize the shape of it. Bureaucracy's promise, which is not a promise but a platform. The videographer's light cut across the foyer. I turned and saw my father, suddenly walking in with my uncle, their gait the same, guttural, and exact in the way family gaits echo. My father's face was clean of expression. His hands were empty. You've made a scene, he said, quiet as carpet. I made a record, I said. A scene will come if I don't get the funds back. My uncle's eyes slid to the doorway and back as if watching for weather. This is a misunderstanding, my father said to the air between us. I authorized the transfers from an account I believe to be ours. If the bank reverses, fine. We'll discuss the terms tomorrow. The word tomorrow had a weight on it, thick with rhythm and expectation. I kept my voice in the narrow channel where certainty sounds kind. I'll discuss later, I said. Tonight, I'll comply with the bank's procedures. The verification call came while my father watched me with the quietness of someone reading a poem in a language they used to speak. I stepped back into the corridor to answer. A second App's agent, more clipped than Patel, read terms, confirmed identity. Asked about the device I was using as if a laptop were a confession. Do you suspect coercion? She asked the question precise but kind. I suspect breach of custodial terms, I said. And I affirm that I'm acting of my own will. Acknowledged, she said, and then her voice softened by a half note. Good instincts. The air from the kitchen fanned soft heat on my ankles. I tucked my hair behind my ears and went back into the hall because people don't stop living just because you've drawn a line. Samia's eyes found mine, dark with concern and mischief, and she made that face she makes when a secret is exciting. I climbed the 2 steps to the stage, hugged her, smelled jasmine and hairspray and sugar. You're coming up for the toast, she said, pressing her glass into my hand. I nodded, let the cold of it ground me, the condensation slick under my fingers. When the MC beckoned me, took the mic and said something simple that wasn't a lie, how we grow around each other like trees. How roots sometimes tug and sometimes anchor, and the whole room made the soft sound people make when they feel included. I saw my parents in the doorway, their outlines cut from the light like paper stencils. The biryani line curled around like a river. I ate quickly, tasted saffron and the dark sweetness of caramelized onions, and checked the case portal for the 6th time. Recall executed pending receiving bank acceptance. It read now. A minute later, the duty judge's clerk sent Hina a stamped acknowledgement. An interim order enjoining dissipation of funds from the identified transfers pending hearing. Served electronically upon the bank and the named account holder, with a note that a physical copy would follow. I read it twice to savor the mechanical beauty of a Thuy enjoining fits in the mouth like a coin. Hina texted, forwarded to bank. Then, stay with receipts. Don't argue in hallways. I smiled into my glass because she knows me better than I do when the blood is noisy. I felt something ease in my spine, not victory, just alignment. Then the receiving bank's auto-acknowledgement drifted in like a leaf. Recall request received. Processing. I forwarded it to Naeem and to Patel and then breathed properly for the first time in an hour. The MC called for the bouquet toss. Petals arced under chandelier light like small comets, falling into a gaggle of girls whose laughter sounded like one bird. I leaned into the sound to let it rinse me. A server set down a tray. The metal rang briefly against glass. My father stepped up to the side of the stage, asked to speak to me. Shh. Then checked himself when he saw the mic in my hand again. The line of cousins who wanted selfies. He retreated to the foyer the way a tide goes out, decisively and without apology. I could have gone after him. I didn't. I stayed and took pictures with my cousin and her new husband. And I found my Aunt Farah, who had always been a quiet friend, and asked her about the embroidery. She had finished by lamplight all week. She touched the fabric and smiled, proud of her wrists. The smell of mendi and talc rose as more guests tucked their hair behind their ears. The air cooling as if the AC had remembered its mission. In a pocket of silence between songs, my phone vibrated again. I stepped back to the kitchens and opened the message from Niem. Receiving bank accepted recall for transfers 2 and 3. Funds returning. Transfer 1 already credited to beneficiary. Recall requires beneficiary consent or court order. Awaiting confirmation. I closed my eyes once. Brief. Gratitude like a small, clean flame. 2 out of 3 back was a country. The third we could take by paper. I walked to the foyer where my parents stood now with an aunt whose voice always shakes. She was telling them about someone's ring. Thankfully, not mine. 2 wires are back, I said, making the sentence light, like placing a cup on a table. My father's mouth went flat. My mother blinked, the way you blink in bright sun. The third, I continued, needs your consent or the court order. We have the interim order. We can ask the judge tomorrow for a directive to the bank to debit your account. Silence folded around us like cloth. My father finally said, "You got legal help at a wedding," as if listing household spices. I got legal help because it was legal, I said, and because the bank has a policy and a timeline. He looked at me for a 10 count, then away, and I saw the small tremor in his cheek he didn't know he had. He wasn't used to being met with continuity. After a long breath, he said, "Give me your word you'll transfer it back to your account after the wedding, and I'll consent now." The offer was a performance with a door in it. I measured the door with a look. "I'll give you my word and an email," I said. "Both are records." He nodded once, annoyance losing weight. "Fine," he said, and pulled out his phone. We went to a corner of the foyer where the lights slanted blue. The bank's reversal link required beneficiary consent. My father entered his credentials. The system pinged him with a one-time code. And he authorized the debit back to the trust, his thumb pressing the screen with an extra pound of emphasis. While he did, I typed an email to Niem and Patel. Beneficiary consent given via recall link. Please confirm receipt and execution. My mother stood to the side, her eyes on the carpet pattern, as if its loops could teach her something about how loops end. A faint scent of smoke from the kitchen oil slid through the air and dissolved. Niem's confirmation came in a minute. All 3 transfers reversed. Funds credited back to Custodial Education Trust. Freeze remains pending your written instruction to maintain, modify. Case closed upon client satisfaction. I forwarded the email to Hina and to myself at a second address because redundancy is a kind of prayer. My father watched my face as if it housed a game he didn't understand the rules of. "There," he said, an attempt at magnanimity, arms lifting from his sides like a shrug, then dropping. Satisfied? Satisfaction isn't a feeling I trust. It wanders. But I felt something simple, relief like soft rain. "The funds are back," I said. "I'll leave the freeze for 72 hours until the court confirms the injunction. Then I'll instruct to remove the freeze. We'll keep the injunction to enforce the trust if needed." He snorted softly. "It was a misunderstanding," he said. "You made it a case." I nodded. Misunderstandings end in records. Inside, the band slid into a slower song, the room's energy dropping like a tide to expose rock underneath. I could have stopped then and let that be the end of it in my mind. But when a process is open, you close it. I emailed Niem again. "Please attach a stamped acknowledgement from your side and the reversal email as a PDF. I'll add it to our records." I also sent a short, neutral message to the family WhatsApp group, "Funds returned to Education Trust. All good. Please enjoy the evening." Because rumor likes to sprout where noise is. Then I saved all the attachments into a folder labeled by date, with a note appended with the case ID and court acknowledgement number. The act of naming things makes the air around me make sense. I went back to the hall just as the MC called for family to join the couple on the dance floor. Solmia beckoned me, her grin a tilted moon. We danced. My mother watched me. My father smiled at the room. My aunt clapped slightly offbeat and then found the beat and beamed. The AC blew a stream of cold air across my neck, lifting the hair there the way lake wind does. For a few minutes, no one talked about money or processes or consent. The lights moved in waves across the crowd. Warm, then cool, then warm again. I let my body mimic the wave and thought about how, tomorrow, the injunction would become an order that would sit in a file next to my trust. A quiet, stern line that would walk beside me. When the song ended, I slipped my phone into my clutch and stood near the stage. Where the light was smoother, the wood warm under my heels, the air made of sugar and sequins and perfume. My father approached, eyes skimming my face like a scanner. "You embarrassed us," he said finally, low and careful. I didn't meet his stare. I met the space between his words. "I took back what was mine by the terms you signed," I said. "Next time, you can ask." His mouth made a shape that could have been a smile if it had more practice. "You've changed," he said, which is something older people say when you stop being convenient. I thought of the document that had become the spine of the last hour and a half. I read the terms, I said. "They changed me. We didn't make a scene. That would have been easier." We stood with other relatives and talked about the couple's honeymoon plan, about flights, hotels, the absurd price of everything that is beautiful. The videographer asked us to pose, and my father rested his hand on my shoulder, and I stood straight but didn't lean. People laughed into cameras and then forgot why. The jasmine garlands had begun to brown at their edges. The air made room for dawn somewhere far away. A message blinked near the top of my phone from Hina. "Save the injunction copy to a secure location. And tell your bank to mark the account notes with cosign required again." I responded with a checkmark and wrote the instruction to Naeem. "Please annotate the account with C-sign rec per trust."
Case.
And red flag attempts to remove custodial terms without my consent. "Keep freeze F97 until 72 hours. Then I'll send instruction to lift." Walking back to the foyer, I realized the cold from the AC had settled in my hands. The skin there felt like unwritten paper. My mother stood alone near the mirror wall again, the brooch still catching light. In the reflection, I saw her face, not arranged for the room. I stepped near without stepping into her quiet. "I left the freeze for 72 hours, I said gently, "in case anyone tries again while we're all still tired." She didn't move. "You made us look like thieves," she said in a voice that wasn't strong enough to be angry. I inhaled the smell of talc and gardenia and something like static. "You made yourselves look like people who don't read." I said, a line I had not rehearsed, one that came out softer than it sounds here. A pair of small girls ran by, their bangles clicking like coins. The far door opened and a wash of humid night came in, carrying exhaust and wet leaves. I watched the doors slow swing and then turn back. "You can be angry," I said. "It's allowed. You can also be careful. That's required." She looked at me as if I were a room she hadn't been in for years. "We raised you," she said again, but the sentence had thinned. "You did," I said, "and you taught me to sign my name." I didn't ask for an apology. I don't know what to do with spontaneous apologies. They don't file well. Instead, I went to the side office the hall used for checks and envelopes. A small room with a desk and a printer and a smell like dusted plastic. And I printed the reversal email and the case closure acknowledgement. The printer hummed and spit warm paper. I signed a small cover memo, "Reversal executed." Freeze applied. Injunction acknowledged, and slipped the pages into a manila envelope with the hall's logo on it. I wrote the date on the flap and tucked it into my tote between a makeup pouch and a thin novel I had optimistically brought. 'Cause habit. I also printed a small Kartsamia and Armin, 10:45 p.m., family fund intact. Don San tucked that into my cousin's card box because stories need talismans. When I returned, the bouquet sat wilting but pretty on a side table. The stems damp, a bead of water traveling down like a slow tear. Somia squeezed my hand. "You okay?" she whispered, eyes quick. "Fun's back," I said. "And we have paperwork because she knows my language." She grinned. "You'll tell me everything later," she said. "Tonight, you're mine on the dance floor." I nodded. The band shifted to something older, a song that had played when our mothers were young. For a brief laugh of time, the room loosened into something gentler. My father swayed with an aunt who had taught me to iron. My mother smiled at someone's baby. I ate a second dessert without tasting it. The AC cut out for a moment, and the room warmed by a degree, voices rising and sticking like sugar, and then the hum returned. That low signature of infrastructure doing its job. I slipped outside once to breathe the warm night that smells like diesel and bougainvillea and the metal of gates. My phone lit my face blue and then went dark. On the steps, a boy wrapped in two big fabrics slept against his mother's knee while she scrolled a cracked screen. I thought about what money means and who gets to call a fun family. In my pocket, a folded paper warmed against my palm. For a long minute, I let the night rest on me. Then I went back in because this was my cousin's night. And inside, there was a dance waiting for my ankles and a camera waiting for my shoulders, and my name was still my name. The last song slid out into applause, and the lights brightened by a click you could feel in your teeth. People drifted toward the doors in clusters, holding purses and blessings in wrapped boxes. The hall staff moved with efficient grace, collecting plates, stacking chairs, sweeping glitter like patient tide. I found my parents at the cloak counter, waiting for their wraps. "We'll discuss tomorrow," my father said again, but the sentence sounded tired now. A bell rung too often. "No discussion needed," I said. "We'll follow the order." He looked at me as if measuring a new height on a doorframe. My mother said nothing. I pressed my hands together, a soft namaste that was both habit and goodbye for the night. Driving home, we didn't speak. The windows fogged at the corners. We cracked them and let the night slip fingers into the car. At a red light, my phone buzzed with a late email from Niem. "Per your request, account notes updated, CO sign required. Any attempt to modify requires beneficiary consent in recorded form. Freeze F97 to remain until 72 hours. Will request instruction to lift on date." I replied with a simple "acknowledged. Thank you," because many wars are won by the shape of their emails. Hina sent a message with a sleepy emoji. "Proud. See you at 9 for the hearing, if needed." I sent her a heart and a line about coffee. At home, the house smelled faintly of incense left over from an afternoon prayer and a hint of lemon cleaner. I passed the big framed photograph of our family taken when I was 10. Our hair arranged by a cousin who loved symmetry. In the picture, my parents' hands rested on my shoulders. In the hallway mirror tonight, my shoulders were bare. I went to my room, set the envelope on my desk, and, without taking off my shoes, opened my laptop again. I backed up the folder to a drive that lives in a zippered pouch, and then to a cloud drive with a ridiculous name. And then I wrote a short log entry, "Wedding night reversal." 3 wires. Freeze code applied. Injunction acknowledged. Family warmed and cooled. The act took 3 minutes. The steadiness it gave me stayed. I washed my face and saw that my eyes had the faint redness that comes with effort. I let the tap run longer to feel the water shift from cold to warm and back. The night air was dense with crickets and far sirens in one bark. I texted Samaya, wrapped. Dance wins. Sleep. She sent me a picture of her shoes on the floor like defeated birds. I lay down but didn't sleep immediately because the body likes to replay any bridge it crosses. I thought of the glass feather pen, the exit sign's glow, the bank agent's measured voice, the exactness of Freeze F97, the stamped order's square presence. I thought of my mother's brooch. I thought of my father's thumb pressing the reversal code. I thought of my sentence at the beginning of all this. The one that opened a channel I didn't know was waiting. Seems I'm not family. Morning arrived the way it does after nights like that, with light that feels like it's asking permission. I made tea and drank it by the window, the steam warming my nose. The world beyond slightly fogged like a memory I hadn't yet earned. My father knocked and didn't wait for come in. He stood in the doorway like an inventory. "We should talk," he said, and it was not a suggestion. I closed my laptop with a soft click and stood. "We can talk here," I said. He came in, looked at the envelope on my desk, then at me. "You've created a situation," he said. "Relatives will ask questions. The bank will remember." I nodded. "Yes," I said. "Both are good." He didn't have a response for that. We both sat. The air smelled slightly of last night's perfume, sweet and faint. A ghost over tea. "I will not apologize," he said, the words placed like stones. "You don't have to," I said. "Just comply." The edge in his eyes softened in the way muscle does after straining too long. He shifted, then leaned forward. "Do you think this is about money?" he asked, genuinely curious for maybe the first time. I weighed honesty against usefulness. "No," I said. "It's about control, and about whether our signatures mean something." He considered, then nodded once as if conceding a minor point in a larger game. "Fine," he said, and stood. At the door, he paused. "You're efficient," he said, as if efficiency were a kind of betrayal. I sent Niem the instruction to lift the freeze on the third day, after the hearing at which the interim order became final in language that would hold even if I were halfway across the world. The bank to maintain cosign requirement. The guardians to refrain from transferring without beneficiary consent. The trust to fund educational expenses only. The judge's clerk stamped the order and handed me a copy that felt heavy for the number of pages it was. I took it to the bank the same day, sat in Niem's glass office with its view of people doing paperwork in miniature, and watched him record the order in their system, his fingers moving with the measured grace of someone who loves procedure. "You moved quickly," he said, half admiring. "You communicated clearly," I said, which is praise where I come from. At home, my mother avoided the trust's name for a week. Using phrases like that, I count the way a person avoids a date on a calendar. My father did not bring it up. A cousin asked me if I'd really printed documents at the wedding. I said yes and watched a light burn in his eyes like fireworks in a glass of water. Sami and I went for ice cream, and she made a record of my face. When I said freeze F97 and then turned it into a sticker because friends know how to turn scars into jokes. Hina and I ate samosas on the courthouse steps, and she told me about another client who had reversed something else in eviction by finding a clause that was sitting there like a lifeguard no one called. "There are clauses everywhere," she said. "You just have to train your eyes." The ripples were soft but thorough. My father started sending me PDFs before signing anything on my behalf. My mother began reading the bottom halves of forms. The bank added a warning code to our profile that politely announced in bank language that this family had learned a lesson. My aunt asked me to help her set up a small college fund for her daughter with clear cosign rules. We notarized it together in a room that smelled of damp stamps and patience. The hall manager sent me an apologetic note about the printing room. It's commandeered and included a voucher for a discount on a future event. I wrote back a thank you and a single line about how their printer saved a trust at 10:30 p.m. He wrote back a line about how it was the first time their printer had been thanked. I returned to classes and sat in the front row of my land finance elective and took notes as if I were annotating the story I'd lived, because sometimes that's what school is. In the afternoons, I worked part-time at a tiny firm that handled small contracts for people who couldn't afford bigger lawyers. I sat with a woman whose hands shook while she signed a will, and I steadied the paper with 2 fingers and then handed her a glass of water and said, "This is you loving them in advance," and she nodded and the shake steadied. On weekends, I tutored a neighbor's daughter in algebra, and sometimes we'd take breaks where I'd tell her about clause numbers as if they were interesting, and she'd pretend they were because she has good manners. Once, weeks later, I ran into Patel at a bank training session I was shadowing for a class project. She recognized my name, smiled, and said, "You were the wedding." We laughed. I told her I admired how she read the policy back to me without condescension. And she said, "You took notes like a colleague." We exchanged cards like people who might someday reverse something else together. Niem sent a short email asking if I'd consider an internship in summer, It's the kind of email you read twice because you don't want to blink and miss a word. I said yes after letting the word sit on my tongue for an hour so it could taste of decision, not reaction. There were quiet, unphotographed moments too. My mother asked me at the sink, without looking at me, if I would be home for dinner on Tuesday, and I said yes, and she nodded, and we ate dal. With a new kind of silence that felt less like a wound and more like a healing scab. My father stood at my door once and said, "If you need money for books, tell me." And I said, "The trust covers it." And he nodded and then, awkwardly added, "But I can also help." And I said, "Okay." It is a strange thing to hold hands with someone who once held your wrists. The night I finally slept without replaying the corridor in the hall. I placed the envelope with the reversal papers on a higher shelf. Not out of reach, never out of reach, but out of sight enough to let life resume its messy parade. There are other battles, and I will fight them with a pen as often as possible. But when I run my finger over the manila's edge, I feel in it a vow I made standing under cold light smelling of rose and steam. I won't shout. I'll use process and receipts. I said it to myself that night like a prayer, and now I say it again, not as a threat, but as a promise. Seems I'm not family. Once, at the wedding, it tasted like iron. Now, it tastes like a sentence that turned into a boundary and then into a bridge. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who might need the courage to choose process over panic. Want more dignified justice stories like this? Follow and tell me what you want to read next.